Jesus, we're seeing people come into contact with him, and then we're wondering, what's the significance of this for us today as we seek to follow Jesus? Today we're thinking about life. We affirm life. We celebrate life. Maybe we wonder, just how good could life be? And in the midst of all the powers, the forces that seek to negate or diminish life, we wonder, can life really be as good as we hope and want it to be? Well, today's passage is a really fun passage set at a wedding, and we get to see Jesus in action and him working in such a way to help us see that through him, life is the fullest that we could possibly imagine it to be, and probably far better than we could ever imagine it to be. We're going to situate ourselves today with the disciples. This is really easy for us. We're going to do exactly what the disciples do in this passage, which appears to be nothing. They're there, but they're hardly talked about. They're just watching and they're listening, and that's what we're going to do. But as they watched and listened to Jesus on this occasion, they probably had a couple of passages from what we call the Old Testament pop into their consciences as they see Jesus working and acting. So I'm going to prompt a couple of those passages to come into our consciences now, so that as we hear Carl read this passage, we're already beginning to have this sense stirred of, well, what is Jesus doing and what is John saying about him? So the first passage comes from Isaiah 25, verses 6 and 7, where it says, "On this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meats and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all peoples, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever." That's one passage. The other one comes from the very end of Amos. The Lord says, "New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from all the hills, and I will bring my people Israel back from exile. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit." All right, those passages are in your mind now. Carl, if you would come forward and read for us John 2, verses 1 through 12.
On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples. There they stayed for a few days. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Carl. If this is going to be up here, we may as well just turn it so you can kind of see the pretty side. All right, okay. All right, this passage has a really delightful feel to it, doesn't it? It captures our attention. It draws us in. There's a sense of wonder. It has this gladdening effect. It fills us with intrigue. Maybe it even makes us wonder, could it really be so? Let's go to a way too basic level to start off at a point where we can all fully appreciate it. It almost begs the question, you'd want Jesus at your wedding or your retirement party or your Christmas party, right? I was curious about this. This is fine wine that Jesus produces, the best, the head waiter says. So I called Butch's Dry Dock downtown. I was curious, what does a bottle of really good wine cost at Butch's? So I asked for one of the best. I can't pronounce it. It's some French Dujac wine, a red wine. He said a bottle of this is going to cost $280. I did not buy one. Then I did a few calculations. Jesus produces somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 gallons of wine on this occasion. To get to that amount of wine, you would have to buy about 750 bottles of this very expensive French red wine from Butch's. And if you bought 750 bottles of this wine at $280 per bottle, maybe they give you a discount, I don't know, but $210,000. That's not a bad wedding gift, right? It gets us thinking, maybe I wouldn't mind having Jesus at my wedding, which is pretty close to where John would have us thinking, I wouldn't mind having Jesus in my life, or even better still, I'm really glad Jesus is in my life already. The setting is such a beautiful setting for this scene to unfold. It's a very natural setting where you're going to have a feast, a celebration, of which wine in and of itself somewhat signifies that this is a special event because wine has a specialness all to its own. Now, we would all agree wine can be overdone, granted. And yet I suspect most of us would probably agree, too, that there's something about wine that allows it has its own specialness to it. It makes an already special event that much more special. It heightens it, in a sense. It's almost like if you were in a mountain village and you saw a stream running through it. It's beautiful all on its own, but if the sun came out at just the right time and hit it at just the right angle, and that stream began to sparkle, this already special scene takes on an even greater sense of specialness. You would agree? Wine, at an already special event, done tastefully well, adds to the specialness of it. Lena and I once got to go to the Netherlands to celebrate a business closing, and we had a meal in a castle, which was cool and special all on its own, and they served some really potent cheese. They also served some really good wine. I don't want to know what that glass of wine cost, but at this really special meal, the glass of wine heightened it because of its own sense of specialness. Here's the problem. At this wedding in Cana of Galilee, the wine ran out. Now, it's easy for us to overlook this. We shouldn't. It's easy for us to say, well, that's just a detail. We know it's going to happen. Jesus is going to turn all this into a big feast anyway, so, okay, minor detail here. Think if this was your wedding. Think if you had planned for months to invite your family and your friends and your whole community to this very special moment, and you weren't going to celebrate for just an evening, but for a week, because this is what people did. So you have this feast planned, and you even go to the expense of acquiring wine that you're going to serve your family and friends, because this signifies the specialness of this moment, and it heightens your awareness of just how special this is, because the wine has a specialness all to itself, and it runs out. This sign of what's so special about this time runs out. You would be at least disappointed. John helps us appreciate this because the word that he uses carries with it connotations of being in lack, being destitute, being in need, maybe even an urgent sense of need. There's a wedding, and it's supposed to be festive, and it's supposed to be celebrative, and at this moment, this one component of the feast that has a specialness all to its own, that heightens your awareness of just how special it is, it runs out. I think we should feel a sense of emptiness with that little phrase. maybe a sense of devastation, certainly disappointment, maybe, if worse came to worse, maybe a sense even of despair, because when the specialness runs out and you don't have any way of getting it back, that's a bad place to be. If we thought broadly about this might be a very compressed metaphor for the Bible's way of talking about human life. We have this intuitive sense that it's supposed to be really, really special. We know this in some way. And yet things happen where it feels like the specialness has a way of leaking out, running out, bleeding out, and it leaves all of life feeling like there's no color to it, like there's no joy even. Wine was a symbol of joy, of festive celebration, and it runs out. How many of us haven't come to these moments in life where you have this intuitive sense that something is supposed to be so good, life is supposed to be so good, and yet it feels like whatever's supposed to make it special is just running out. A relationship just runs out. A life runs out. An ability runs out. Something runs out. We named that at the beginning of the service in terms of the ways in which life feels like it gets diminished. Where it feels like there's these powers that work against our enjoyment of life, and it leaves us feeling like something has just run out. And it feels as though there is nothing that we can do about it. And if there's nothing that you can do about it, when that specialness runs out, that's a bad place to be. We were cleaning through some things yesterday, and Annika found this little bracelet, so I'm wearing it. It says, "Be nice," and most of you know what that is, right? Be nice. Jeff Alhart was here. There was this campaign, Be Nice, because people, when they have a sense that the specialness is of running out of life, and it lands in despair, then suicide becomes a thought. And we say, hang on a minute, we are going to promote life, so we're going to be nice. We're going to notice, invite, and challenge, and empower. That's what the nice stands for. When the specialness of life runs out, when we feel like it's gone and there's no way for us to get it back, it lands people in a very, very dismal place. The wine ran out. Sometimes it feels like the wine runs out of life. Sometimes we become aware of situations and circumstances where people are actively trying to get rid of the wine, not in their own life, but in the lives of others, through oppression, through extermination, through abuse, through profiting off of somebody else's body. And we look at that and we say, what is happening? And even if it's not us, we live with the awareness that something bad is happening. And it feels like we can't do anything about it. And it feels like the wine is running out and the specialness of life is going, and we feel helpless. We can't be sure, but maybe Mary comes to Jesus with something of this urgency. Jesus, there's no more wine. There's a brief interchange. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. But eventually, Jesus does what Mary wants him to do. This symbol of joy that is suddenly gone, Mary wants it replenished. So Jesus tells some servants, hey, there's these jars over here. Fill those up with water. Fill them to the brim. And now draw from one of those and bring it to the head waiter. And the head waiter is astounded. This is the best. Who does this? Who serves this best wine last? Nobody serves the best wine last. There's all sorts of things we could talk about with that. But the waiter is stunned. Here's the best. Jesus turns this water into this wine, restoring the symbol of specialness, restoring the symbol of joy in the midst of this wedding feast, and the headmaster and all who would taste of it are simply stunned. Now, we wish John would give us a few more details, perhaps, about what were people's reactions. The servants who are carrying this wine that they knew was just water, they just drew this out. They're carrying, what are they thinking as they bring this to be tasted? They saw Jesus. There was water. Now there's wine. Can you imagine yourself in that situation? Do you think you might be intrigued by this guy? We're not told any of that, and probably for good reason. We're very simply told that at the end, this was the first sign that Jesus performed And through it, he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. John is at the very beginning of pointing us to this Jesus. Pointing us to Jesus because John understands that Jesus is the one through whom those ancient Old Testament prophecies are being fulfilled right now. All of those dark powers that seem to cause the specialness to leak out of life, the shroud of death that Isaiah talks about, yeah, that's going to be overcome. And the result, this feast with wine. Exile. The Israelites, taken forcefully from their homeland, lived as oppressed people. Oh, you're going to be brought back. You're going to be settled here. There's going to be a feast. There's going to be wine. It's a symbol of joy and celebration. You're going to like it. John wants us to see with him this Jesus, the one through whom these great promises are being fulfilled, such that whenever we have this sense that the specialness of life is running out, we know the one to whom we can come, can turn, can seek, can run, and know that he's the one who restores the specialness in a way that we could never imagine, which might prompt a question, then why, ... you fill in the blank, and where, ... you fill in the blank. Well, what about this? We're here. We're the ones who have recognized Jesus. We're the ones who seek to follow him, and yet still sometimes maybe it feels in our own lives the specialness is running out. For whatever reason, it feels as though we have this intuitive sense that life should be a little bit more full. I should be living with this circumstance that it seems to erode the specialness. What about that? I've pledged my allegiance to this one already. Where might we find it then? How might it be restored? So two things, we'll say. Two things, and then a couple of affirmations to round this out. The first thing we need to say is John is helping us understand something about the presentness of this Jesus and the effects that he already brings, and the fact that we're still waiting. We just came through Advent. We know this. We're still waiting. Jesus is going to say just before his death that in this world you'll have trouble, which is an indication that, there's a specialness